Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, oil is on the rise once again following the latest developments in the Middle East. West Texas Intermediate crude is up 2 1/3%, trading at $71.45 per barrel. Brent, the international benchmark, is up 2.2%, trading above $75. This as Israel vows to retaliate after Iran fired about 200 ballistic missiles at the country. Israel says most of them were intercepted, but one person was reportedly killed in the West Bank. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says they will fight back.
Iran made a major mistake and it will pay for it. The regime in Iran just doesn't understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate to our enemies.
Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there through an interpreter. U.S. warships helped to shoot down the Iranian projectiles. The U.S. says the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. Bloomberg News Middle East breaking news editor Dana Kraish has more on diplomatic efforts to end the fighting.
The U.S. has been taking on this diplomatic role primarily because it doesn't want to be dragged in a war in the Middle East. It has interests there, it has bases there, and that could be very risky for them. It is not just a risk from Iran firing directly at Israel, but also proxies spread around to fire at U.S. interests and U.S. bases in the region. You have ones in Syria, ones in Iraq still. Even after the Israeli attack on the southern suburbs in Beirut, there were reports in local media that there was heavy deployment by the Lebanese army around the U.S. embassy there. So these interests are at risk because of the proxies, and the U.S. is trying not to drag itself into this war that is becoming more regional by the day.
Bloomberg's Dana Kraish says Iran's latest move was a reprisal for Israel's killing of the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah.
Well, Nathan, the war in the Middle East was one of the opening topics in what could be the final debate of 2024. Democrat Tim Walz went after former President Trump at the start of the CBS News vice presidential debate.
It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met.
Republican J.D. Vance was quick to respond.
As much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence.
The two running mates also sparred over immigration and the economy. Senator Vance aimed his fire at the top of the ticket.
If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now, not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago.
And during the debate, Governor Walz appeared nervous at times. He addressed some of his past misstatements, like when he said he was in Hong Kong for the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989.
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said.
And Senator Vance tried to soften his party's approach on abortion rights, an issue that Democrats have tried to capitalize on.
We've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do.
And following the CBS News vice presidential debate, Donald Trump posted on social media that he not only doesn't support a federal abortion ban, he would veto it.
Well, Nathan, there is plenty of reaction to the vice presidential debate, and here's Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis right after the debate.
You know, I don't know if there were winners and losers. I think each one of them sort of comported themselves in a way that wasn't, particularly special, but, sort of met the needs of their candidates.
I think from a purely debating perspective, I think you have to give it to J.D. Vance. I don't think that's much of a surprise. He is a seasoned debater. I think what he did that threw Tim Walz off a bit was he was very sort of willing to reach across the aisle. He was friendly. He was affable. He was talking about being bipartisan, all of those kinds of things.
And that's Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis on a special debate edition of Bloomberg Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Mize. Hear more of their analysis on the Balance of Power podcast, available wherever you download.
Well, Karen, it is day 2 of the strike that has shut down 36 ports in the United States. Bloomberg's John Tucker is here with the latest. So, John, are we seeing any signs of progress?
Few, if any, Nathan. President Biden met with his chief of staff and other senior aides yesterday evening to discuss the strike and reiterated his desire for his team to continue urging the carriers to present a strong offer to the longshoremen. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su, she could prove instrumental. She helped to broker a deal between West Coast dock workers and their employers last summer. The ILA president, Harold Daggett, told longshoremen at the picket lines to prepare to stay off the job for as long as it takes to get a deal for even higher pay and protections from automation, which actually could prove to be the bigger obstacle. Bloomberg Economics estimates a hit to GDP of as much as $3 billion per day from foregone spending and production. A week-long strike could knock 0.3 of a percentage point off annualized GDP. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, let's turn to the markets now. And futures are lower again following the escalation of fighting in the Middle East. As for company news, shares of Nike, they're down more than 5% this morning. The company has withdrawn its guidance after sales missed estimates. Let me get the numbers from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It underscores the challenge that incoming CEO Elliott Hill will face when he takes the reins later this month. During the company's call with analysts, Chief Financial Officer Matt Friend said the move was due to the upcoming leadership transition. Before the call, Nike reported revenue in the fiscal first quarter that dropped 10% to $11.59 billion, falling short of the average analyst estimate. The declines were especially sharp in North America and the region including Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, while the Converse brand also persisted as a problem area. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Charlie, thank you. And in Asia, Chinese shares listed in Hong Kong have jumped the most in almost 2 years as traders returned from a public holiday. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index climbed by more than 8%. The extended rally comes off the back of increased optimism around China's economy. Authorities unveiled a range of stimulus measures last week.
It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Today, President Biden will survey the devastation in the southeast caused by Hurricane Helene. Biden says it's urgent to get a federal response to the victims of the storm. He also talked about the administration's preparation ahead of Helene.
We had over 1,000 federal personnel, including search and rescue teams, at the ready on the ground before it hit.
Biden spoke at an interagency briefing dedicated to the federal government's response to Hurricane Helene. More than 160 people were killed in the storm, and hundreds are still unaccounted for. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper.
We have 92 search and rescue teams who are continuing to work to rescue people. We know that there will be more fatalities.
Governor Cooper says rescue teams are trying to reach those washed out by the catastrophic flooding. The attorney representing Sean Diddy Combs categorically denies claims that his client sexually assaulted anyone. This after a new lawsuit filed against the hip-hop pioneer on behalf of more than 100 alleged victims. They're suing Combs, claiming they are victims of the hip-hop mogul. Several allege that they were invited to a party and given a drink that made them black out. Attorney for the alleged victims, Tony Busby.
We now represent 120 individuals who intend to bring civil claims in civil court against Sean Diddy Combs, as well as claims against many other individuals and entities.
Combs is in jail after a New York judge denied the hip-hop mogul's request for bail last month on charges of sexual assault and racketeering. The change of plea hearing for the former doctor charged in actor Matthew Perry's death is scheduled for today in Los Angeles. He is expected to plead guilty to one count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. Perry suffered from depression, and his doctors convinced him that he needed to take high doses of ketamine. And John Amos, who starred as the family patriarch on the hit 1970 sitcom Good Times, has died. Amos also earned an Emmy nomination for his role in the 1977 miniseries Roots. John Amos was 84. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. All season, the Mets have not made things easy for themselves. Began 0-5 or later 11 under 500, and so often when they won, they did it in come-from-behind fashion. Happened in that epic playoff-clinching win in Atlanta. And the next night in Milwaukee, twice the Brewers went ahead. Both times the Mets followed with runs, 3 in the second inning, an even bigger uprising in the fifth.
And a swing and a bouncer right side. It's a base hit. 1 run is in for New York. Here comes Vientos from second. The throw goes to third. And the Mets have scored 5 runs in the fifth. They now lead the Brewers 8-4. And this entire rally has happened with 2 outs.
ESPN, the call. Not a single hit by either team after that. Mets won 8-4. Another win tonight gives them their first series victory since 2015. In San Diego, Fernando Tatis Jr., 2-run homer first inning. Padres went on to shut out Atlanta 4-0. In the American League, the road teams won. Detroit red hot down the stretch with a likely Cy Young winner, Tariq Skubal, dominating. The Tigers won 3-1 at Houston. That breaks the streak for the Astros. They had won 10 consecutive series openers. Kansas City won 1-0 at Baltimore. That's the Orioles' 9th postseason loss in a row. All 4 game 2s take place today. The Mets game starts at 7:30. At Barclays, another win for the Liberty. They held on at the end, 88-84 over the defending WNBA champion Aces. Sabrina Ionescu scored 24. Liberty 4-0 in the playoffs, up 2-0 in the semifinals. They go for the sweep Friday in Vegas. The Lynx beat the Sun. That series tied at 1. It would not be a surprise if the Raiders trade Davante Adams. They admit to talking to teams. Adams has now requested a trade. Jets are interested. Adams, many years a teammate of Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Rodgers said yesterday his relationship with Jets coach Robert Saleh has been great since day one. The two openly disagreed about Rodgers' use of cadence last Sunday. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. And the Bloomberg Sports Update, it is brought to you by Audi. Visit your Tri-State Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model you've always wanted.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Tensions in the Middle East are running higher than ever after Iran's barrage of ballistic missile attacks against Israel. Speaking through an interpreter, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is promising to retaliate.
The regime in Iran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and our determination to retaliate against our enemies.
For the very latest, with us from Tel Aviv is Bloomberg News Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner. Ethan, good morning. First off, do we have a sense of the impact of Iran's attack yesterday? Obviously, it was much bigger than what we saw back in April.
So the attack was much bigger, Nathan, and indeed the impact was bigger. But it still was relatively limited. We're still gathering what we can figure out about. There seemed to have been some apartments damaged north of Tel Aviv. There was a restaurant damaged. There was 1 man killed in the West Bank, a Palestinian. But I'm unaware of any other deaths or any very serious damage from this attack. But these missiles got through some of the air defense systems, and it was a much more punishing attack. This was 200 or so missiles compared to what it was in where there were 300 in April, but this time they were all ballistic missiles, so they were much more dangerous.
At the same time, we did hear from the White House. I believe President Biden said that the attack appeared to have been defeated and ineffective. At the same time, as we just heard, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is vowing retaliation. What kind of response could we see, could we be anticipating from the Israeli side?
I think we're looking at a fairly severe expectation. I think that this is going to ratchet it up. I think the Israelis feel that they have to respond with severity. I don't know when it's going to come, but I think it's going to come in the coming days. And I think it's going to go after, it's not going to be symbolic. It's going to go after some fairly important spots in Iran, strategic, perhaps oil, perhaps nuclear. I don't know. The Americans say that they're on board with cooperating in some fashion. I think we are looking at a fairly intense upsurge here, to be honest.
So we don't see any sign that the movement of further U.S. Personnel, further U.S. equipment into the Middle East could be acting as some kind of deterrent at this point?
I don't mean, when you say deterrent, the implication is that it's to deter Israel's actions. I think the idea, but I mean, I think that the
or
deterrence
to de-escalate
is supposed to,
things.
Yeah. So I think that the goal of sending those people and personnel and equipment in is to bolster the anti-Iran approach, and so I think that may happen. And I think that no, I don't think that the Americans are seeking to drive Israel away from much. I don't know. I mean, obviously they're negotiating together right now, but don't forget that the Americans said to Iran, "Don't do this, and if you do, there'll be severe consequences." And now it looks like there will be. I don't really know what that means, but I think there's reason to believe something quite serious is afoot, and soon.
Is there a risk at this point that if we do see further direct confrontation between Iran and Israel, that even more parties could be drawn into the conflict?
Sure. I mean, the parties that you're thinking about, I suppose, are the various militias and proxies that Iran, funds and trains. So they will certainly. I expect there will be more terrorism inside Israel the way there was yesterday. Two guys carried out gun attacks south of Tel Aviv. There might be more of that. Look, I don't think that the states are going to get involved, Syria, Egypt, and so forth. And I don't think so. I think when we talk about an uptick, we mean the United States and Iran. That's about as big as it gets, right?
Right. Well, we'll be continuing to monitor developments. We appreciate the update from you, Ethan Bronner, our Middle East Israel Bureau Chief, joining us this morning from Tel Aviv. And for more insights, we have a roundtable discussion on what's happening in the Middle East, as well as reaction to the vice presidential debate from CBS News, where the tensions between Israel and Iran did figure prominently. Joining us now is Tina Fordham, the founder and geopolitical strategist at Fordham Global Foresight, along with Terry Haynes, the founder of Pangea Policy. Thanks to both of you for being with us this morning. I want to start with you, Tina. Where do you see the level of tension now between Israel, between Iran and Iran's proxies following Iran's missile attack?
Thank you. It's clearly very elevated. Markets have been trying to ignore the escalation since October 7th of last year. The anniversary is coming up. Israel will need to respond, and we stay in this very dangerous, high-stakes game of geopolitical ping pong. But market participants will be focused on targets, and for something that seems to be different in terms of escalation. So last night's attack had a modest impact on oil prices, but that's going to be counterbalanced by Saudi Arabia's announcement that it's increasing its production targets.
Terry, I want to bring you into this conversation as well. We saw the candidates for vice president address this issue, the current tensions between Israel and Iran right at the top of last night's vice presidential debate. Did the running mates meet the moment? Did they make the case effectively, in your view, for the tops of the tickets being able to confront these geopolitical risks?
Well, I don't think they convinced anybody that already wasn't convinced for one candidate or the other. But the unanimity in the approach overall should be a significant takeaway for people outside the United States as to the degree of unity that, in fact, and bipartisan unity that, in fact, does exist. Beyond that, markets have been ignoring a great deal. You've already got the highest geopolitical risk in 50 years. This situation in the Middle East is preciously close to boiling over completely. A great deal depends on just how proportional the Israeli response is and to where it's pitched, whether it's, the Iranians, of course, have gone after the citizenry. And, Ethan, in your last segment, says, I think quite rightly, that what you're going to see from Israel is a lot more targeted towards military targets and the ability to continue to prosecute a war on the Iranian side. the question is what the Israelis do next and the degree to which the Iranians see that as a provocation. So this situation is much more fraught than markets are used to. Markets think this is the same old, and they're reacting that way, and it's not.
We did see a wide range of topics discussed in the vice presidential debate last night. Terry, I want to ask what stood out to you?
Well, fundamentally, for markets, what markets heard is that, I thought was very consequential, or rather they didn't hear it. Neither ticket nor neither political party wants to deal with or talk about unsustainable U.S. fiscal debt and deficit, which is firstly is a significant markets concern. Secondly, it imperils the ability of the United States to continue, directly imperils now the ability to continue to fund domestic programs of all kinds. And thirdly, we're now in a situation, I think, which markets are slow to pick up on, that but debt service is now larger than anything, spending on anything else. It's larger than defense, larger than healthcare, larger than anything. And great powers don't last a great deal longer in that situation. And yet, neither political party is interested in even talking about it, much less dealing with it. So that I think that was a major market disappointment.
Tina, what are some of your reactions to the vice presidential debate? Obviously, a lot of discussion, maybe not necessarily pointed on fiscal policy, but we did hear a lot when it comes to the threat of tariffs from former President Trump, on immigration as well.
Well, of all of the things that might move the needle in the polls that we could talk about, the escalation of the Middle East conflict being one of them, the longshoremen strike, Hurricane Helena, the VP debate does not figure. The discussion was not intended for market participants, and there has been no discussion whatsoever in this campaign about the U.S. deficit and spending. That tells you something quite important. But I do think there were some interesting surprises that came out of the discussion, and one of them was that we saw a bit less of the attack dog J.D. Vance. He was smooth in his delivery, and there was a lot of what is called Midwestern nice. I don't think anybody was expecting that.
It's an interesting point that you make there, Tina, that possibly world events, so much happening in the world could wipe this vice presidential debate off of voters' memories, potentially, with just about 5 weeks to go before the November election. Do you see any impact from the vice presidential debate when it comes to where things stand in the race, in this very tight race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
Well, I wrote before the debate that I didn't want to discount anything that might see even a tiny shift in polling or sentiment, given how tight the race is. But is the VP debate going to register? I mean, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump didn't register in the polls. So I think we're going to forget about this debate tomorrow, or maybe even by lunchtime.
Terry, I want to bring you back in. Was this a forgettable debate? Is there just too much going on that's going to take voters' attention away?
Look, from a vice presidential candidate perspective, a forgettable debate is a good debate. These people don't want to stand out or be a distraction to their ticket, and so at root. Neither candidate harmed their ticket, harmed themselves. In fact, I thought they did. Both of them did themselves credit for a variety of reasons. But the top of the ticket is going to continue to be what matters. And Vance did, I thought, the best he could with. Things like January the 6th and, the accusation that Trump was waffling back and forth on a variety of things and making things worse. But people have made their minds up about Trump, regardless of what Vance had to say. And, the fact that that this debate will be forgotten is a good thing for both tickets, frankly, because it refocuses on the top.
Well, perhaps one thing that former President Trump might want voters to remember in the moments after the debate, Tina, is his promise now that he would veto a federal abortion ban if it came to his desk. Do you see that moving the needle on this issue that Democrats have really tried to exploit? Only have about a minute left.
Well, that was a dramatic change in stance from President Trump. And to me, it reflects that, the data is probably being shown by his campaign that he's underwater with female voters. And there is a dramatic gender gap between Democrats and Republicans, and as well as between the candidates. It is close to 20 percentage points. But I do think this announcement is too late. And most people have settled into their positions. I don't think it will bring female voters to Trump, but maybe it will ease the minds of those who are concerned most about reproductive rights should he become president. Having said that, he's a very malleable candidate when it comes to his positions.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.